Institutional-based correction. Table of contents: Sing Sing Prison, Auburn State Prison, Pennsylvania System, Auburn System, Forms of Punishment, Age of Enlightenment. Introduction. What is Sing Sing Prison? Sing Sing Prison is a maximum security prison located in Ossining, New York, in use since 1826, one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States. Sing Sing Prison on the Hudson River at Ossining, New York, originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison. It was constructed in the village of Sing Sing on the east bank of the Hudson River, some 30 miles, 48 kilometers north of New York City. It was designed to provide additional prison space and to replace Newgate Prison. The Hudson River is a 315-mile, 500-kilometer river that flows from north to south, primarily through eastern New York in the United States. It was designed to provide additional prison space and to replace Newgate Prison. Construction was undertaken in 1825 by convict laborers under the supervision of Elam Lentz, warden of Auburn State Prison. He officially became head of the new prison when it opened in 1826, though it was not completed until 1828. Captain Elam Lentz was a prison warden. He helped create the Auburn system, which consisted of congregate labor during the day and isolation at night, starting in 1821, and was warden of Sing Sing from 1825 to 1830. The prison population rose in the mid-19th century, resulting in more construction. The four-story complex was soon 6 stories, and the prison eventually housed more than 1,600 inmates. Because most of the early convicted criminals traveled by boat to Sing Sing, the phrase "up the river" came to mean going to prison. On the notable visitors to the prison was Alexis de Tocqueville, author of Democracy in America. The French government sent him and Gustave de Beaumont to the United States in 1831 to gather information about the American penal system. Tocqueville was active in French politics, first under the July Monarchy 1830 to 1848, and then during the Second Republic 1849 to 1851, which succeeded the February 1848 Revolution. He retired from the political life after Louis Napoleon Bonaparte II, December 1851 coup, and the theater thereafter began work on the old regime and the revolution. The two men were amazed at the total subjugation under which prisoners worked and the administrative power the warden wielded at Sing Sing. Lange resigned as a warden of Sing Sing in 1830 and returned to Auburn in 1838. He was asked to leave that prison a year later after the death of a prisoner who was punished severely for feigning illness despite this record. Sing Sing rehired Lentz in 1843. Whipping and floggings were commonplace punishment at Sing Sing. Frequently used was the cat-o'-nine-tails, a cruel whipping contraption whose lashes were often tipped with metal or barbs. Its use was finally abolished by the New York State Legislature in 1848. Whipping and flogging. Flogging, also called whipping or caning, a beating administered with a whip or rod with blows commonly directed to the person's back. It was imposed as a form of judicial punishment and as a means of maintaining discipline in school, prisons, military forces, and private homes. In addition, while Lentz was warden, inmates were expected to refrain from making noise, which included talking. With the advent of the electric chair in 1891, Sing Sing became notorious for its executions. Although the electric chair was developed at neighboring Auburn, almost all executions within the state were carried out Sing Sing until 1963. The infamous death chair was later moved to Green Haven Prison. Electric chair. Execution by electrocution performed using an electric chair is a method of execution originating in the United States, in which the condemned person is strapped to a specially built wooden chair and electrocuted through electrodes fastened on the head and leg. Sing Sing was also the site of reforms that affect the national penal system. Reformer Thomas Mott Osbomi, who developed his penology theories while voluntarily incarcerated for a year at Auburn, served as Sing Sing warden in 1943 to 1914, 15, and 1916. But his immediate sweeping changes were assailed and he resigned under intense political pressure. Thomas Mott Osborne Thomas Mott was born in September 23, 1859, October 20, 1926, was American prison administrator, prison reformer, industrialist, and New York State political reformer. In assessment of Osborne's life, a New York Times book reviewer wrote, his career as penologist was short, but in the interval of the few years he served, he succeeded in revolutionizing American prison reform, if not always in fact, then in awakening responsibility. He was made of the spectacular stout of martyrs, to many people perhaps ridiculous, but to those who lived his theories most closely touched, inspiring, and often godlike. During his tenure, however, the first psychological work with inmates began. More reforms were instituted under Lewis Edward Laws, who served as a warden from 1920 to 1941. Sing Sing Prison Cell. Sing Sing Prison Cell to construct in the 1825 cell block, the incarcerated excavated marble from a nearby marble quarry. The original building was 476 feet long, 44 feet wide, and 4 tiers high, with a capacity of 800 cells, all built of Sing Sing marble. Each cell was 7 feet deep, 3 feet 3 inches wide, and 6 feet 7 inches high. Auburn State Prison. Auburn State Prison, located in Auburn, New York, opened in 1826, established a disciplinary and administrative system based on silence, corporal management, and concrete group labor in architecture, and the routine. Auburn became the model for prisons throughout the United States. Auburn State Prison, located in Auburn, New York, opened in 1826. It established a disciplinary and administrative system based on silence, corporal punishment, and concrete group labor. In architecture and routine, Auburn became the model for prisons throughout the United States. In the early 19th century, many Americans believed that industrialization and dramatic demographic, economic, and political upheavals had conspired against the traditional control of family, church, and community. Auburn originally used concrete cells, but in 1821, Warden William Britton borrowed the concept of solitary cells from the so-called Pennsylvania system. Britton designed a unique feed-tiered cell block of 2 rows of single cells placed back to back in the center of the building. William Britton, born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA on about 1700, to William Britton and Rachel Stilwell. William Britton married Mary Thomas and had 8 children. He passed away in 1879 in Moreland, Montgomery County, PA. This pattern of small inside cell blocks was later adopted by most state prisons in United States, whereas the Pennsylvania system, inmates did handicraft work in their cells. Auburn prisons labored in concrete workshops, offsetting imprisonment caused by fulfilling private industry contracts. Subsequently, all male inmates worked in concrete shops by day, returning to individual cells at night. Females first committed to Auburn in 1825 were relegated to an attic and excluded from regular work and exercise. To ensure that inmates did not corrupt one another Britain, a successor, Elma Lenz enforced a quasi-military routine of absolute silence, strict discipline, and economic productivity. Pennsylvania System. The Pennsylvania system was an early prison system requiring system inmate silence, individual cells, and inmate labor in those cells. Pennsylvania system penal method based on the principle that solitary confinement fosters penitence and encourages for reformation. The idea was advocated by the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, whose most active members were Quakers. What is the difference between the Pennsylvania system and the Auburn system? The Auburn system was criticized for its being too harsh on the punishment and lack of having rehabilitative potential. The Pennsylvania system was criticized for its being too costly due to their focus on solitary confinement. The Pennsylvania system spread until it predominated in European prisons. Critics in the United States argued that it was too costly and had deleterious effects on the minds for the prisoners. Different types of criminal punishment. Incapacitation. Incapacitation seeks to prevent future crime by physically moving criminals away from society. This punishment can be traced to ancient times. Terence myth and Hong Lu write in Punishment, a comparative historical perspective. Banishment was a common penalty in antiquity. Later, it was common for colonizing European countries to ship convicts and undesirable overseas. In modern times, house arrest, incarceration, and the death penalty are all forms of incapacitation. And about three-quarters, 76.46%, were arrested within 5 years. Despite these findings, incapacitation is a common form of punishment in the United States. Deterrence. The goal of deterrence is to persuade citizens and possible offenders or offenders to conform to the rules of law. Mead and Liu explained that 4 types of deterrence are generally recognized. 1. Specific deterrence analyzes how effective punishment is on individual. Marginal deterrence seeks to reconcile how effective different types of punishment are as either specific or general deterrence. Number 4. Partial deterrence refers to situations in which the threat of penalty has some deterrent value, even when someone engaged in illegal behavior. For example, a criminal simply robbing a victim instead of also causing physical harm. 5. Retribution. As one of the oldest forms of punishment, retribution has roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition of justice. In her book Criminal Law, Lisa M. Storn explained that retribution prevents crime by giving victims or society a certain sense of satisfaction that the defendant has been punished appropriately, reinforcing the belief that the criminal justice system is working effectively. Modern examples of retribution include the widespread practices of imposing fines as well as enforcing mandatory sentencing policies for certain offenses under the law. As an effective punishment, retribution has been criticized as being overly rigid and limited in its capacity to change societal behavior. However, it remains popular. Rehabilitation. A common prison policy in America up until 1976, rehabilitation focused on helping criminals and prisoners overcome the barriers that lead them to committing criminal acts. This includes develop occupational skills as well as psychological issues such as drug addiction, aggression, explains the American Psychological Association's APA. Consider the opposite of retribution. The ultimate purpose of rehabilitation is to transition offenders back into society. The APA reports that in examining massive data, individualized approaches to crime complemented with community-based approaches can provide effective in reducing offender recidivism. Restoration. A radically indifferent approach to criminal punishment, the goal of restoration is force the offender to make direct amends to both the victim and the community in which the crime was committed. Although a relatively new practice in modern times, the concept of restorative justice can be found in the early legal system of Western Europe, Asian Hebrew justice, and pre-colonial African societies. During the process of restoration, victims initiate as a process in which both they and the offender meet to share feelings and concerns. The dialogue of the dialogue offers victims the opportunity to heard and the offender to make amends and receive forgiveness. Restorative justice is used often in crimes involving youth offenders. Personnel behind correctional institution. Cesar Beccaria. Cesar Beccaria in full Cesaria Vonsina Marquez de Vicaria, born March 15, 738, Milan, Italy. Died November 24, 1974, Milan. Italian criminologist and economist whose Del Pin for Crimes and Punishment in 1820 was a celebrated volume on the reform of criminal justice system. Italian criminologist and economist whose Delite e del Pen for Crimes and Punishment in 1820 was a celebrated volume on the reform of criminal justice. Beccaria was the son of Milanese aristocrat of modest means. From an early age, he displayed the essential traits of his character. At the age of 8, he was sent to the Jesuit school in Parma. Beccaria later described the education he received there as a fanatical and stifling to the development of human feelings, although in 1760, Beccaria proposed marriage to the 16-year-old Teresa Valco, encountered the obdurate opposition of his father. The following year, the marriage took place without parental consent, and the young people began their life together in poverty. The bridge between father and son was ultimately repaired, and Beccaria and his wife were received into the family home in 762. A daughter, the first of his 3 children, was born. Marquess of Beccaria Venice, Italian economist and proponent of judicial reform. Cesar Beccaria was the author of the most famous Italian work of the entire Enlightenment on Crimes and Punishment in 764. Beccaria twenties were the most important decades in his intellectual and emotional life. He was temperamentally inclined to lethargy and anxiety, but when young could also be vulgarized by inspiration and express his feelings in the language of Rousseau. He married his first wife in 761 against strong resistance from his family, and wrote on crimes and punishment in 763 when he was 25. His friendship with Pietro Veri 728 to 797 and other ardent young Milanese reformers did not, however, outlast the 760s, for in their eyes he seemed to lose all of his vitality and to settle into an arid and routine private life, which nevertheless allowed him to hold his melancholy at bay. Beccaria himself dated his discovery of the Enlightenment to 761, when he began to read the works of the French and Scottish philosophers and discuss them with a circle of young friends led by Pietro Viri. Beccaria prepared the edition now regarded as a defined in 1766. The work became known in France through the translation of André Morellet 727 to 1819, who freely altered the Italian text. Beccaria, for some reason, never posted against this, and then it spread throughout Europe. It was attacked by conservatives everywhere and was defined by adherents of the Enlightenment. Voltaire composed a commentary on it. In October 76, Very and Beccaria journeyed to Paris to bask in the admiration of the philosophers there, but Beccaria quickly became despondent and fled back into Milan. On Crimes and Punishment combines elements from social contract theory, which Italian position. It touches on my aspect of law and justice and rapid in passion, style completely abjuring legal technicalities. The penalties themselves should be carefully proportioned to the corresponding crime and calibrated to deliver the minimum of punishment necessary. Beccaria sought at all costs to minimize or abolish the use of violence and the infliction. Overall, the book is sustained attack on the juridical culture of the Asian regime, as well as a sketch of the principle on which it ought to be performed as to produce unquote the greatest happiness sharing among the greatest number unquote. Cesar Lombroso. Cesar Lombroso rejected the established classical school, which held that crime was a characteristic trait of human nature, instead using concepts drawn from psychognomy, generation theory, psychiatry, criminology, um, criminology, Lombron's theory of anthropological criminology essentially stated that criminality was inherited and that someone born criminal could be identified by physical congenital defects, which confirmed a criminal as savage or atavistic. Described the father of modern criminology, Cesar Lombroso theory of the born criminals dominated thinking about criminal behavior late in the early 20th century. November 6, 1835, October 1909, was the founder of the Italian School of Positivist Criminology. He rejected the established classical school, which held the crime was a characteristic trait of human nature and that traditional choices were the foundation of behavior. Lombroso, using a scientific approach and concepts drawn from psychognomy, early eugenics, psychiatry, and social Darwinism, argued that criminality was inherited, and that born criminals could be identified as physical defects, which confirm a criminal as as savage and cold. While his particular identifying characters are no longer considered valid, the idea of factors that predispose certain individuals to commit crime continues to be foundational to work in criminology. William Conqueror. William 128 to 9 September 1087, usually known as William the Conqueror and sometimes William the Bastard, was the first Norman king of England, reigning from 166 until his death in 1807. A descendant of Rollo, he was Duke of Normandy from 103511. William was the son of the unmarried Duke Robert of Normandy and his mistress Herleva. His illegitimate status and his youth caused some difficulties for him after he succeeded his father, as did the anarchy which plagued the first years of his rule. During his childhood and adolescence, members of the Norman aristocracy battled each other, both for control of the child duke and for their own ends. William was the son of the unmarried Duke Robert of Normandy and his mistress Herliva. William William I by name William the Conqueror of or William the Bastard or William of Normandy. French Guillaume is concurrent of Guillaume Le Bastard or Guillaume de Normandy. Born in 1828, Falaise, Normandy, France. Died September 9, 187 from 1066, one of the greatest soldiers and rulers of the Middle Ages. He made himself the mightiest noble in France and then changed in the course of England history by the sequence of that country. Enrico Ferri, born in Lombardy in 1826 and worked first as lecturer and later as a professor of criminal law, having spent time as a student of Cesare Lombroso. While Lombroso researched anthropological criminology, Ferri focused more on social and economic influence on the criminal and crime rates. Ferri research led him to him postulating theories calling for crime prevention methods to be the mainstay or law enforcement, as opposed to punishment of criminals after their crimes have taken place. He became a founder of the positivist school, and he reaches the psychological and social positivism as opposed to the biological positivism of Lombroso. Ferri, at the time of Radical, was elected to Italian Parliament in 1826. In 1893, he joined the Italian Socialist Party and edited their daily newspaper, the Avanti. In 1904, he spoke out in Congress against the rules of social minister in Borghese governments. Ferri favored Italian neutrality during World War I, and he was elected as a Social Party deputy in 1921. In post-war Italy, he became a supporter of Mussolini's fascist regime. Ferri died in 1929. Clifford Shaw. Clifford Grove Shaw, 1895 to 1957, was an American sociologist and criminologist. He was a major figure in the Chicago School of Sociology during the 1930s and 1940s, and is considered to be one of the most influential figures in American criminology. Shaw and Mackey work span the trivial areas, studying geographic variation in rates of juvenile delinquency, the study of autobiographical works by delinquents, and the development of the Chicago Area Project, a delinquency prevention program in the Chicago area.